certainly the large majority, but we can also help out if a contractor did something wrong, if a neighbor caused some damage to property, things that might not be covered under insurance, we can also help with those. Now, today's class is all about adjuster pitfalls and things that you guys might be missing. And I decided to focus it in on the policies. Because what I find when I talk to adjusters is the fact you guys review these things all day, every day, but might miss some of the kind of nuances that are within that policy. Now, I taught this class online a couple weeks ago, and there was a really great turnout and really great response to it. So I wanted to teach it for you guys because I thought it was something that could really help the entire Metro crowd. If you guys have questions through this, please let me know. But if you go through this class and you think, okay, I was clearly not understanding insurance policies as well as I should, next month I am doing a lunch and learn online called Policy 101. And the entire purpose of the class is to really break down how to review an insurance policy, what it means when you see HO3 versus HO4. Hopefully you know that, but if you don't, this class will be perfect. And it'll break down what the different sections talk about. Why is there a significance to an area that has additional coverages versus just the main HO3 all risk language? Why does that matter and how does that play out? I think that class is going to be really helpful, so if you want to talk about it, let me know. Up on the slide, you've got my cell phone number and my name. Feel free to reach out to me with any important questions. I'll be happy to do it. I'm going to try and get through this as quickly as I can. This is about MAPIA. For anybody who isn't a member, it is a local association of adjusters. We get together throughout the year to talk about some of the laws that are coming out, some policy issues, things that are coming out that you guys can join. The other great thing is MAPIA also has a legislative branch that gets their own lobbyist. So we have a lobbyist that actually supports our industry, and that's one of the things that, it's only a $300 a year fee. One of the things that you get. If you sign up, we have a Christmas party that's going to be coming up that we're planning. So feel free to go check that out online. All right, so getting into it, our first offender of the day is one of the largest, Allstate. A while ago, Allstate used to be my least favorite insurance company. That is no longer the case. They're still terrible, but there's a few other people that I despise even more, and we'll talk about them. But what I want to point out in the Allstate language is something that is actually relatively unique to Allstate. Does anyone know what makes this language different than most other carriers? I'm sorry? Sure, no C, but that's actually pretty common. HO3 policies will have named perils for C, which is the personal property. So most HO3 policies will say that. No, what's unique about this is sudden and accidental. Now you might say, wait a second, I argue this all the time. It's always sudden and accidental. It's not actually true. Allstate became the common theme in this world for insurance, so everyone was arguing sudden and accidental. But the fact of the matter is, most insurance policies don't use the word sudden. Most insurance policies will either just say accidental direct physical loss or just direct physical loss. If you get into some commercial policies, it might say risks of direct physical loss, which is a whole different can of worms that I don't even want to get into. But the point is, the word sudden isn't in most of these insurance policies. Well, who cares, right? Why does that matter? Well, why it matters is you don't have to have that burden of proving sudden in these HO3 policies. It's not in the policy language. Our only burden on an HO3 policy is to prove whatever is in that language. Everything after that is up to the insurance company to disprove you, prove an exclusion, prove why it's not covered. So don't put the burden on yourself to do something like force yourself into sudden when you don't have to. If the words aren't in there, don't create them and make it harder for yourself to be successful when presenting a claim. Now, this goes to something else. When you present a loss, if you've got all risk language, you don't have to identify the actual cause of loss. It's not required. You can go in and put a claim in and say, look, I've got direct physical loss to the property. We're making a claim. End of story. You don't have to identify if it was a frozen pipe. Frozen pipe claims are one of my biggest frustration. I know if you have a frozen pipe, you can get the plumbing paid for. I know that's extra money. But I also know that a frozen pipe claim comes with extra burdens. And if I were an adjuster and I wasn't 1,000% positive that heat was on at that property, I'm putting that claim in as just a broken pipe. Not frozen, nothing about it. It's just, I've got direct physical loss from water, putting the claim in. Because what that's going to do is the insurance company doesn't hear the word frozen, and maybe you slip one through where they don't realize that it was a frozen pipe, and now you've got your coverage without ever having to worry about that can of worms of heat being opened up. All right, so think about that when you're presenting these claims. Think about, just like you don't want a homeowner putting a claim in because they might say something stupid like, oh, I don't know how long this was going on, it could have been months. You don't want to be putting in something like frozen pipe if there is any question at all about the heat being maintained at that property. Don't overburden yourself when you're putting these claims in. All right, our second offender. This is my least favorite insurance company. Snake Farm is the worst one. I'm sorry, State Farm is the worst company out there. I cannot stand them. Everything about them frustrates me. And the reason I hate them the most over someone like Farmers is I've always said, at least Farmer puts in the policy that you're not going to be covered for this stuff, right? State Farm tries to manipulate the policy in a way that just doesn't make sense. So here we've got some language from the State Farm policy, and this is actually consistent through most homeowners' policies. And what this language is the ensuing loss provision of the policy. And what in essence it's saying is you're not covered if, in the first section, you're not covered if any of these things are part of the loss, whether it occurs before, during, or after, you aren't covered for it if it's one of these causes of loss. And then, after that section, they put this secondary language saying, however, we will pay for any resulting loss if it's otherwise not excluded. These two things cannot coexist. It is impossible for the first provision to make sense and the second provision to make sense. And luckily, when things don't make sense in the insurance policies, they come out in our favor. If it's ambiguous or confusing, we get the benefit of the doubt for that. So now that you know this, why does it matter? Well, it matters because if you get a loss that is denied under an insurance policy for something like wear and tear to the plumbing. Now, everyone knows the wear and tear to the plumbing itself isn't covered, but that ensuing water damage is. And it's because of that secondary language. But that's the same thing for things like construction negligence. If you have ensuing loss coverage for construction negligence, the roof was put on wrong, they didn't tarp it correctly, whatever the case may be, and now I've got water damage, it doesn't matter that it was improper construction, you've got coverage because of the ensuing loss provision. You want to make sure that you've got a really good understanding of these sections because otherwise you're very likely leaving money on the table. This is the section for the construction negligence. It's at section 3 of the exclusions, but it has the same exact language. Don't let the carrier manipulate you or the insured into believing they're not covered simply because they cite that exclusion. If you have a way to show that it is the ensuing loss, the resulting loss, you've got a way to get coverage. That can take a ton of money out of the insurance company's pocket and into the client's and also yours. All right, so let's keep going. Our third offender. This one I'm going to go through more quickly because I've talked about it, I think, once before in front of everybody. But this is the Travelers ROT endorsement. Travelers in their policy and a number of other carriers have coverage for ROT so long as it was hidden from view. And normally there's a specific policy limit, $5,000, $10,000. What Travelers was doing is Travelers was denying these claims and saying, well, the ROT's the result of a long-term water leak that is otherwise excluded. And I filed a class action and we were successful all across the country and we got Travelers to change how they actually adjust these claims. Because what we found out was, wait a second, Travelers, if you've got a ROT endorsement, but you're denying it because it's a long-term leak, all ROT that's ever existed is the result of a long-term leak. And thus, this coverage is what we deemed phantom coverage. It's never going to be awarded because you're always going to deny it. Travelers recognized what they did. They paid a ton of money to policyholders across the country who had this problem and even paid bad faith money because they recognized how egregious their conduct was. If you have a situation where Travelers has this policy language for the ROT endorsement, saying in essence they have coverage for it and they deny it because of a long-term leak, you've got to let me know. They're in breach of the settlement and they are going to be in deep, deep, deep trouble. And we can fight that claim. You can be the expert and get paid as the expert, so always keep that in mind. All right, some more from our good friends at Allstate. So Allstate has this unique language. I've brought this up, but I don't believe I've ever told the entire Metro crowd, so I wanted to bring it up again today. Allstate's language is relatively unique, and this fight is well worth having, so pay attention if you handle Allstate claims. Allstate has two options for how they pay for a loss. Number one, we have the option, we being Allstate, to repair, rebuild, or replace all or any part of the damage destroyed, blah, blah, blah. So they have the option to repair, rebuild, or replace. Option number two is the payment, meaning they're not going to do the work, but they're going to pay the insured for the loss. And when they pay for the loss, their only option is to pay for all or any part of the damaged or destroyed property. So what does that mean? Let's talk, the example I always give is the wood floor. You get water damage to a wood floor. Maybe that wood floor could be sanded and refinished as a repair. That's possible. Unless Allstate is sending out a flooring person to do the work, the only option Allstate has under the policy is to pay for the wood floor, not pay for the repair. I hope you got that because that's really important. They do not have the option to pay to repair. They only have the option to pay for the damaged property itself, meaning they have to pay for the damaged floor. That can make a huge difference when you're dealing with claims like smoke, water damage, any number of Allstate claims. You should never think about what's the repair. You've got to think what's the replace. That's what matters with Allstate claims, and it makes a huge dollar difference. Arguably, yes. But if they do, so the question was, do they have the option under A to actually send out a contractor? And I'd argue, yeah, they do. They have the right to do that. But by doing it, they accept the liability if something goes wrong. Allstate doesn't want that liability. Allstate's not going to send someone out to do that. Does what include roofing? This language would apply to roofing as well. Absolutely. It applies across the board. This is their settlement options. They've only got two of them. So double check your claims and think, am I repairing something or am I replacing something? That's the question to ask yourself. Back to Snake Farm, sorry. Oh, geez, this is, come on, get off there. Here we go. Back to State Farm. Everyone who's talked to me about this knows that this is kind of my biggest frustration with State Farm, and it's all about their period of time leakage language. Most policies you will read say something along the lines of, we don't pay for continuous or repeated seepage that occurs over weeks, months, or years. Or we don't pay for continuous or repeated seepage for 14 days or more. That's the normal language. Well, what State Farm has done is they've come and put in this language and says, we don't pay for continuous or repeated seepage, which occurs over a period of time. Yeah, who wants to define that one for me? Is a second a period of time? How about a minute? An hour? A month? A year? A century? A decade? A millennia? I mean, it's so ambiguous on its face. Now, there have been other attorneys that have tried to fight this language in the past. I don't know how they lost. It really blows my mind. But there has been some bad law in 7 states. This has been fought, and they've lost. Well, I have taken on the fight, and I got State Farm to admit through one of their adjusters at Toussaint, they agreed this language is ambiguous. And as a result, we have yet to lose this claim. I've fought these over and over, and I have yet to lose because nobody can read this and say, oh no, I know what that means, right? It doesn't make sense. So if you have one of these claims, this is another area where you can always fight back. And all you need to do is send a letter to State Farm and say, hey, just curious, how long does the leak have to be occurring for this language to kick in? They're not going to answer that question. And as soon as they don't answer it, you send it to litigation, you file for bad faith, and we fight the fight. All right, and that's how you can make the money off of this. Because what happens is 2 things. You've now sent your client to an attorney who knows what they're doing, an attorney that can get them money where money was not had before. And that client is now a happy client. And they are going to be a referral source for you for the rest of your life. On top of that, you also get paid on the claim as the expert in the loss. So you still can make money off of your effort if it goes to litigation. All right. So other policies that have this 14-day leak language is pretty rough. I think this is one of the most common denials I ever see is when it's a long-term leak. They come in and say, I'm sorry, you're not covered, long-term leakage, 14 days or more. But what we've got is a good fight on our hands. And the fight is the first 13 days are covered. And your only job as an adjuster is to say, I understand that Allstate or Snake Farm or Farmers. I understand 14 days or more isn't covered, but I'm not claiming the damage from 14 days and on. I am only claiming damage from the first 13 days. I took on this fight with Allstate, and we got some really great testimony. Oh, before that, I forgot that this is one of the things. Another thing that is missed by a lot of people, if you didn't know this language under a lot of policies about 14 days or more only applies to plumbing. It does not apply in most policies to roof leaks, to exterior water coming in. So don't let the carrier cite this long-term leakage language because they think the roof's been leaking for more than 14 days. It doesn't apply. So make sure you know that when you're doing your reviews and you go out to a house and you say, oh man, I know you didn't know about this, but that leak in the ceiling from the roof is definitely more than 14 days. I don't even want to put the claim in because you're not going to be covered. That's not true. You've got coverage for that. This long-term language doesn't apply to that stuff. So what we did, I got the testimony of Lou Mincarelli. Anyone that works in this area knows good old Lou. Lou is Allstate's #1 denier of claims. He's notorious in the industry, and he's also a yes man on the stand. So I love suing on Lou Mincarelli claims because he will just agree with me. It's fantastic. So what I had is I went through some questioning about this language, and it says if the drain line causes water to escape into the property, the first time that water escapes, that's covered by this policy, correct? Correct. And in fact, it's actually covered up to 13 days of leaking in this policy because it doesn't get excluded until it's been going on for weeks, months, or years, correct? Yes. Now, after I asked this, the judge actually stepped in and says, hold on a second, can you repeat that? I want to make sure. And he repeated it. And then I followed up because I really wanted, as soon as I got the first yes, I'm like, all right, I got to push this. So I followed up again and I said, well, when a pipe breaks, it can leak. The first 13 days it's leaking is covered under the insurance policy. Yes. Correct? And he says, it does say weeks. Yes. Correct. That's the stuff after, it's the stuff after 14 days on, that portion of the loss is not covered. Correct. He says, right, the long-term damage is not. So we now have from an Allstate representative that the first 13 days are covered. And this language applies across the board. This isn't just Allstate. But now, as a result of this, we can push Allstate claims very easily, and we can push the rest of them just as much because we can win this fight. There's nothing in the policy that says those first 13 days aren't covered. So if you ever get a claim denied for long-term leakage, just go back and say, no, I'm only claiming the first 13 days. Make them talk about the first 13 days of water damage. If they cannot find a way to exclude that damage, you've now turned a completely denied claim into a covered loss. All right, appraisal language. I did a whole class on this, and if you want to see the full class on appraisal, go to our Facebook page, WDB Legal, on Facebook, and you can watch the video. It's well worth watching. But all I wanted to bring to the attention of everyone here is that appraisal is becoming a massive problem in the industry. If you haven't been dealing with appraisal, you probably will at some point. You're going to recognize it is completely changed. This is the old language in the appraisal provision. And it says, if you and we have failed to agree on the amount of loss, either may demand an appraisal of the loss. Now, how this language is interpreted changes from state to state. I've always fought, kind of regardless of the state, that if you have one number and they've got a different number, that's it. That's all you need. That's what the policy says. Pennsylvania agrees with me. New Jersey does not agree with me. New Jersey says scope is not appraisal. Pennsylvania says it is. But what is happening is the language is starting to change. So we now have new appraisal language. That is the farmer's appraisal provision. It is significant. It is also untested. There's a lot of stuff in that appraisal provision that's untested in the law and candidly untested in the field. I don't think a lot of people are following this on farmers. It's impossible. So all I want you to recognize is that you should read the appraisal provision, do what you can to comply, but the ludicrous things that are in there, it's impossible. No one can do it. So don't be dissuaded simply because of this. All right. Another one from our good friends at State Farm. This is their access provision. I focused, by the way, on the large carriers simply because they are the large carriers. They're the ones you're going to see all the time. There are issues with other smaller companies out there that you should talk about, and I'm happy to do that. But this language comes from Allstate or State Farm when they first added in the 2340 endorsement about access. And for those of you who don't know, the access provision used to say, we will pay to access the system, which in essence caused your overflow or leak into your house. And they changed it to say, we will now only pay to access that specific point from which water escapes. Fine. That could be okay, except they added this when they sent it out. And I want you to look at this where it says potential reduction of coverage. And it starts off by saying, although not intended to change coverage, this change could potentially reduce or eliminate coverage, depending on how it's interpreted, and in that regard should be viewed as either an actual or potential reduction in or elimination of coverage. What? Right, that doesn't make any sense, right? State Farm, step one, we're not changing anything, guys. Don't worry, perfectly fine. Everything's normal. Side here, guys, we're taking a lot of shit away. So make sure you realize we're taking it away. We're just not telling you that we're taking it away. Now this gets worse because the section that they put in is under additional coverage. So now it's gone from we're not making any changes, we're taking shit away, and we're adding stuff in. We're giving you more. That is so misleading. And the court agreed with us. We filed on this and we won bad faith damages on it because the court recognized State Farm, you can't do this. You can't possibly be telling people 3 different things in the same page. That's ridiculous. So we have come back and we fought that language. So here's the new language. And I want to point it out because I want you to know how to fight this so it doesn't have to come to me. I tell you every time I talk, I keep saying this over and over, I don't want you to have to send a case to me. I want you to be able to resolve it without my help. That's ideal. I can say it because I know the insurance companies are still going to be unreasonable and things are still going to have to go to litigation, but maybe it gets a few more claims in your pocket. So when you fight these claims, you want to be focusing on where the water escaped. And they're going to say, well, if it's a toilet overflow, the water escaped from the toilet. And you're going to get a plumber to come in and say, no, actually what happened is that line underneath the slab, it broke, it collapsed in, and water was escaping from that line as well. It wasn't just the toilet, it was escaping from the line underneath. This provision does not require the water that damaged the property be the same water that escaped the plumbing system. So as a result, if you get that from a plumber to say, no, there was water escaping from the line, you've now triggered your coverage to get that access to replace the line. That's going to be your way around it. So the question was, if there's no water coming out of the line, in essence, if the drain line doesn't have a break, doesn't have a reason for water to be escaping from it, there wouldn't be access coverage. But what I'm going to tell you is you're not going to have that overflow unless there's something wrong with that line. There's going to be somewhere there is a break that water is coming out. If it gets crimped, that would happen either from, it would get very specific. If you don't have a break in the line, you're gonna have a very hard time getting coverage. If it's something more unique to that and there's not a break and you want me to review it, we can talk about other ways around this. Great question. So John's question was, in essence, okay, now we get them to pay for access, right? They owe for that specific point for which water escapes. How much will they replace as a result of that? And the answer is they owe for as much as is necessary to replace that part. So if you get a plumber to come in and say, look, this line is 90 years old. I cannot tie in new plumbing to the old line. I got to go to a connection. That's what they're going to owe under the policy. That's the fight that we've always had, and we've been successful with it. We also have currently a class action going against State Farm based off of this language that has gotten past the first judgment stages. So we are off to the races on this thing, and we are doing everything we can to get State Farm to renege on this language and change their policy. It's not going to be enough, in my eyes, to just make payment. I want them to actually change the language. All right, some notable mentions at the end here. Some important things are the frozen pipes. Reiterating it again, you don't have to put it in as a frozen pipe. You could save yourself a lot of headaches if it goes in as a broken pipe. Stucco and siding. Remember that ensuing loss language we talked about? Under the stucco issues, constantly coming up, right? You get a claim, water damage inside the house. The carrier comes in and says, look, we'll pay you for the water damage as ensuing loss, but we're not paying for the stucco. Not, it was construction negligence not doing it. Fine, I recognize the stucco's construction negligence, but you're admitting that any water that gets past that stucco is covered water, right? Sure, absolutely. Great, because that sheathing underneath that stucco, it got water damaged and it got delaminated. And now I got to replace that sheathing. I'm so sorry. And the only way to do that, I got to take the stucco off. So sorry, I can't do it from the inside. Now you owe for the stucco. I have fought this claim. We've actually, through Metro and the assistance of Chris Powers, who I don't think I've seen here. Chris Powers, as the initial expert on this, and we've used him a few times since, have won this claim. We've got entire homes restuccoed as a result. Chris did a great job with his report. So if you guys have that issue, it's worth the fight. Contents insured anywhere. One thing people seem to forget is that contents at a property are insured for up to 10% under most policies of the contents limit anywhere in the world. So if they're out at storage in some unit somewhere, you've still got coverage for that. So don't forget that. The burden, this comes back to that type of loss. You don't have to say what the type of loss is. Your only burden is to prove accidental direct physical loss or direct physical loss, or with Allstate, sudden and accidental direct physical loss. You don't have to say what the source was, you just got to show the damage. A lot of policies that are under construction, that does not equal vacant. Even if the house is empty, as long as it's under construction, under a number of policies, you don't have to worry about vacancy. Don't let the carrier try and trip you up with that. Collapse. A lot of times we have these issues of the long-term leaking, hidden decay that's been going on for forever. Most insurance policies for the homeowners cover the hidden decay. Allstate is one of the ones out there that doesn't, but make sure you're reviewing that coverage, because if you've got a collapse issue and you can get anyone to say, oh, it's the result of some level of hidden decay, you're most likely going to have coverage for that. Vandalism versus theft. This one comes up all the time, and I'm going to do it with the next one, which is also tenants. These things work all in conjunction, and this is really important. Vandalism is intentionally damaging something for the sole purpose of damaging that item. There's no other reason it has been damaged. And what carriers will come through all the time and say, oh, it's just hard living, right? Well, you've got to show, look, this isn't hard living. This is something that was intentionally done to damage the property. That's the goal of vandalism. Theft is the taking of something from outside of a property. These two provisions can often have different requirements, different triggers, different issues like vacancy, like tenants that cause the problem. And you want to review the policy to make sure you put it in the right way. So let's talk about something like stolen pipes. Someone comes in and steals the copper. Is that vandalism or theft? Why isn't it vandalism? Sure, they were trying to damage the property, right? They were purposefully cutting the copper out of my house. That is an intentional act for the sole purpose of damaging that property. So that could be vandalism. Maybe it's theft, maybe it's vandalism. Point is, read the policy to see which one's going to be easier for you to fight over. And for the love of God, never say it was the tenant. All right? I cannot tell you how many times I get a claim where the insured put it in and they said, oh, my tenant, they destroyed the property before they moved out. I'm so furious. It's infuriating for me. Unless they were there or had a video camera going, they have no idea who caused this damage. They don't know if it was a friend. They don't know if it was a relative. They don't know if someone broke in the middle of the night just to trash the place. Nobody knows for sure. So do not say it was the tenant. The reason I say that is as soon as you say it's the tenant, you're going to hit a number of exclusions in the policy. It's not the tenant. You have no idea who did it. It's not your job to know who did it. All that has to be done is it be reported to the police and you report the claim. That's it. Last one was appraisal versus litigation timeline. And when I say timeline, I don't mean how long it takes, although I'm happy to answer that question if anyone wants it. What I mean is, when can these be triggered? We've gotten a number of claims over the years where it's past the statute. Most policies have a suit limitation provision of a year, some are 2 years. Business policies are almost always 2 years. Point is, double check that. Because once that passes, I am so unbelievably limited, I probably can't do anything with the case. Appraisal does not have that limitation. Neither does adjusting the claim. We have a claim actually that was being adjusted from down in North Carolina that we had to take, and we filed it up in Philadelphia because luckily the carrier is up here. And the carrier sent a denial letter after, it was 3 years was the statute in North Carolina. And on 3 years and a day, they send out a letter and say, we're denying the remainder of your claim because you're past the suit limitation provision. Not based off of any language within the policy other than the suit limitation provision. That's not allowed. They are not allowed to come in and say, we're not paying the claim because you can't sue us. That's ridiculous. So we talked about it. I advised them to send a letter that says, okay, well, look, we want to demand appraisal. And we demanded appraisal, and they came back again saying, no, we're refusing appraisal because you're past the suit limitation provision. Appraisal and the suit limitation are completely independent provisions within the policy. They have nothing to do with one another. Appraisal is not a lawsuit, right? It's specifically there so you don't have to have a lawsuit. And the carrier cannot get away with it. So if you have a loss and something has gone wrong and you are past that suit limitation, ask yourself, is this something I could send to appraisal? That limit is still there for you to say, I've still got that option. So don't worry about the suit limitation. And if they refuse appraisal based off of it, give me a call because we can fight that fight. Oh. Great question. So two things were said. So the question was, can appraisal be requested if there's been no admission of liability? In essence, if they haven't had coverage. First, I want to make this clear. Appraisal is never a request. Appraisal is a demand. There's not an option. Once one side wants it, it's a demand. You don't never use the word request. With that being said, if there's no liability, you can't get appraisal. Appraisal is purely about valuing the loss. So you want to make sure that you've got something on the table. I constantly tell adjusters, $1 is the most important and the hardest one to get. But as long as you can get to that $1, you've got a much better shot. If there's already been, have you already gotten coverage? I mean, have you already gotten some level of money? Well, then you should be fine. I mean, if you've got coverage, depending on where the claim is, anything that they've certainly accepted coverage for, any state, you're going to be able to go to appraisal. Now, the scope of the loss, if you've got an issue of repair versus replace for something like a roof, every state's going to be different about that. So the carrier might come through and send a denial saying we're denying the replacement of the roof and we're only covering this section. That's going to cause some issues, but it's certainly something we can, with some good letter writing, might be able to address. That'd be much more loss specific. Yeah, yes, they can use that language. You don't, if you are involved before the police report has been made, you should be advising them to tell the police that they don't know who did this. They've got no idea. Right. So just to reiterate for anyone online who might not have heard Bill, most policies don't require the reporting to the police on vandalism claims. That's almost uniquely for theft. So make sure you're reviewing the policy for that. Was there another question? Okay. Luann? Oh. Yes, so absolutely. So so the question was, if there is a loss, the carrier's accepted coverage, but the estimate that the carrier did was under the deductible, would that be enough to trigger coverage or trigger the allowing for appraisal? And answer is absolutely. They've accepted liability, and now the question is price. Doesn't matter if it was under the deductible. Any other questions? Well, so the question is, if there's solar on the roof, water comes in, it all depends on what caused the water to come in. If it was the result of the solar company, you go after the solar company. If it was the result of the storm, we go after the carrier. So it's really going to be a question of what caused that water to come in. And we can certainly talk about that. If you want to send me the specifics on that case, we can sit down and chat about it. Ooh. Okay, all right, this is or a fact specific question. Something about I've talked about. All right, we can test you guys a little bit. Should I make it easy? Make it easy for them? Yeah. Easy one? All right. What? Oh, right. Good point. All right, so I've also got to give this to someone who doesn't normally call me. Okay, this is good. No, I will give it to the first hand up. Let me think, what were my slides about now? Look here. Got my cheat sheet. Got my cheat sheet here. It's okay. No, it's okay. Yeah, right. Okay, I got a good one.